Let's get into this Yankees discussion because they have been baseball's best team so far, currently sitting at a 10-3 record as we are recording this without their ace Gerrit Cole as well, and they have won all 4 series so far against 4 playoff teams from last season. So getting big contributions from young players and bounce backs from veteran stars, but they do have some concerns as far as sustainability goes, overall pitching, and they've gone 5-0 in one-run games so far, and that is bound to even out. So Taylor, I'm going to you, man. Has this Yankee start been a fluke, or can this continue?
Well, like you said, there are definitely some signs that, maybe there's some regression coming. And obviously, starting 10-3, there's probably regression for any team. But one of the reasons why I think the Yankees can sustain this is the direction that Carlos Rodon has gone to start the year. I really like that he's developing a couple of different offerings to complement his fastball slider combo. And I think that's huge for the Yankees as a team, because going into the year, everybody was talking about Rodon. He's this clear X factor for this team because of the questions about the rest of the pitching staff, and especially once the Gerrit Cole injury news came out. And last year, he was basically just a fastball slider guy. That's kind of traditionally what he's been in the past. And these days, that's not a very unique pitch mix. So if that's all you're rolling with, you've got to be throwing nasty sliders and really, really intimidating fastballs. But this year, he's expanding that mix so far in the starts we've seen from him. In his last start against the Marlins, he threw 10 changeups and more cutters than sliders. He threw 16 cutters and he threw 15 sliders. He still has that great fastball velocity, and so far he's throwing the slider a tick harder this year and the changeup a tick slower this year. And, this might be some early season variance, but I think that that's more of an effort to create more of a separation of velocity between his secondary pitches, because last year the slider and changeup were basically the same velocity, and now they're about 2.5 miles apart, which is more than enough to disrupt a hitter's timing. And that cutter has also been a really big pitch for him, and that's sitting around 91, so that puts that right in between his fastball and his slider velocity wise. And that cutter usage is really important for him because it gets hitters off of that fastball a bit. It gives him another offering that hitters are going to need to look for up in the zone. It gives him a pitch that he can potentially generate more ground balls with, which is a big issue for him. And it's another offering that'll play well against right-handed hitters and will potentially pair well with the changeup that he threw a bunch in that last start against the Marlins. And even Alex Verdugo was excited post-game to talk about Rodon's pitch mix. He was all excited that he was throwing changeups, and there are obviously still some concerns. He's not out of the woods yet. He had a really bad home run problem last year, and so far this year he's still giving up a lot of fly balls and not generating a ton of swing and miss. So, and he gave up, I think, 2 home runs versus Arizona in his second start. But it feels like with each start, he's trending more in the right direction, and I do think we're starting to see Rodon transition from more of one of those guys that just relied on stuff to get by, and it feels like now he's becoming more of a pitcher. And I think that there is a lot of reason for optimism there, especially because we need somebody to hold down the top of that rotation for the Yankees until Cole comes back. If he can pitch to that high 3s, low 4s range and just get deep into games, you got to be really, really happy with that. And I think the rest of the rotation I feel pretty good about too. And that's something, if you're looking for a team to win a division, you need starting pitching depth. And I feel pretty confident in what the Yankees have right now. You kind of know what you're getting from Nestor, Stroman, and Schmidt. They're going to provide stability in the middle of that rotation. Luis Gil has looked good so far. Luke Weaver's a depth option. I'm not overwhelmed by his talent necessarily, but he's a good depth option. And JT Brubaker could also be some additional depth that the Yankees just traded for recently, and he should be back at some point this year. And then in the minors, you've got Will Warren, who is already looking pretty polished. He just has a couple things to tighten up, mostly just some command stuff. And Clayton Beeter also has some really nice stuff in the minors too. And there's a chance that later in the year, if he can work on some things, we might see him as well. So you need starting pitching to win a division, and I think the Yankees have that, and especially with Rodon pitching well, this team has plenty of options, so they don't need to rush Cole back, which is huge because you got to keep him healthy, and you want him pitching at full strength in August. And on the offensive side, we're going to talk about some of these guys a little bit later, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but the Yankees starting out 10-3. We're recording this on Friday evening. I think the game against the Guardians tonight just got postponed. 10-3, Judge has a 744 OPS, and that is my biggest. That is my biggest, and it's a pretty simple argument for the fact that I think this success is going to continue. Because if I were to tell you that the Yankees went on a 10-3 run in 2024, you'd be like, oh wow, I bet Judge was just going nuclear for 13 games, and that's what happened. And that's not what's happening this year, and it's because of the balance and consistency of the lineup. The home runs, they're going to come and go, but the teams that can have good at bats and hit the ball hard are going to find consistent success. And as of Friday morning, the Yankees are leading the league in pitches per plate appearance with 4.18. They're working themselves into hitters counts like 2-0 and 3-1 more than almost any other team. And they've developed this really cool dog mentality, very Brett Gardner-esque. And that is exactly the vibe that I want with this team going forward. And honestly, the acquisition of Juan Soto has been the heart of that movement. He's kind of championed that style of play. And we're going to dive deeper into him in the next segment. But it's hard for me to say that this team is not going to stay on top of this division if the pitching remains consistent and if Judge and Soto stay healthy. It's hard to argue against this team.
Taylor, to your point, man, as far as the pitching depth goes, I think most of us Yankee fans, obviously we're both Yankee fans, most of us Yankee fans at the beginning of the year, after we traded for Soto, I kind of talked about it in the preseason episode, it felt like we traded all of our pitching depth for Juan Soto, but you see, like you mentioned, you see Rodon come in and he looks like an MLB pitcher again. It's not like we need these guys to be like their former all-star selves anymore. We just need them to be MLB players at this point, and that's what Rodon has been. Nestor's look really good. Luis Gil, his stuff is filthy. We would like him to get a little bit deeper into games. But for the concerns about the Yankees, I'm with you guys who have concerns about the Yankees, because I hear you. Okay, everyone who watches this show knows we're Yankees fans at this point. Okay, so again, the critiques are understandable, but do you really think for 1 minute, after the level of baseball we've watched from this team in the first 4 series of the season, that I'm going to come in here and rain on their parade? Hell no, I ain't doing it. This ain't a fluke. This team is really good. Coming into the year, we knew about the additions. Okay, obviously Juan Soto, Verdugo, Stroman, we knew about all of them, most of which have been really good to great. Okay, but they were still going to be relying on veterans who have been there, who have been good in the past, and young players who have also, shown flashes but haven't quite put it together. Okay, that's where a lot of the detractors were saying, oh, all they did was add Soto, everyone else has flaws, which is true to a certain extent, okay? But those same detractors fail to understand that a lot of these veterans that were bad in 2023, no doubt about it, they were good in 2022 and just kind of had off years for whatever reason it was. 2022, Nestor Cortez threw 158 innings at a 2.44 ERA and a .92 whip, was an all-star and was 8th in the AL Cy Young. But in 2023, he was hurt from the start of the season. If you guys remember, he had a hamstring issue in February, kind of affected the start of his season. He had to try to rush back, and then he ended up hurting his shoulder, limiting him to 63 innings at basically a 5 ERA last year, and he was terrible, okay? Carlos Rodon's story, like Taylor mentioned, very similar. Obviously, him being at a higher level, though. He was top 6 in NL Cy Young in both 2021 and 2022. In 2022, he led the NL in FIP at a 2.24 and Ks per 9 at 12, okay? So this guy was really, really good. Then last year, obviously, he also started with a back injury, screwed his whole season up, and messed his whole timing up, and obviously, he pitched close to damn near a 7 ERA, culminated by his final start in 2023, if you guys remember, in Kansas City, where he gave up 8 runs and didn't get a single out. Okay, he couldn't have been much worse than he was, and he also couldn't have handled himself much worse than he did last year. He handled himself really, really poorly, okay? And again, these are just 2 very good examples of many different veterans on the team, why it was hard to believe, for some people to believe in the Yankees. Other guys like Stroman, he was great to start off 2023, then he got hurt and struggled. Clark Schmidt started off 2023 bad, then was solid. Offensively, Rizzo was kind of the same. 2023, he was awesome until he got that concussion. Then he was terrible. DJ started terrible. Then he was good in 2023. Stanton was solid in 2022, but was awful in 2023. So again, lots of guys that hadn't completely put it together in a season or so, but all guys besides Clark throughout their careers who you could see them playing at an all-star caliber level, and we aren't that far removed from any of that, So it wasn't unreasonable to say, hey, these guys are going to have, these guys had some sort of weird outlier 2023s this year. They're going to be back to maybe not being great again, or not even good again as they were in 2022, just much better than they were in 2023. And I think that has shown to be the case so far. And because this rotation has pitched well, and Taylor, like you mentioned, this offense is scoring runs without Judge, without Gleyber Torres, who was their best player, basically their best hitter throughout all last year, and without Rizzo really producing. And all 3 of those hitters, I probably would have penciled in outside of Soto to be the most likely to hit well in this lineup this year. None of those 3 have produced well, and the offense is still scoring runs without those three producing. How are they scoring well without those three producing? Well, obviously the additions, like I mentioned in the offseason. I don't know about you, Taylor. I've loved what I've seen from Verdugo, just having winning at bats consistently. Like you mentioned, that mindset. He has big at bats and big situations. Verdugo has that dog mentality as well. And I think we'll see a lot of meaningful contributions from other vets, Trent Grisham and John Birdie, coming off the bench as well. But these young guys are stepping up, okay? Other things you heard from detractors from the Yankees in the offseason were Volpe and Oswaldo can't hit. Who knows about Wells? Again, those were fair criticisms coming into the season. But also, again, it wasn't unreasonable to think that 21 to 25-year-old players who just got their first big league experience would come back a year later and be better, okay? And Volpe, Taylor, Volpe's been amazing, okay? The maturity at the plate he's shown so far is absolutely incredible. We saw it in spurts last year. Overall, last year, 2023 was a terrible year for him offensively, but he would have a 5-game stretch here, a 10-game stretch there, a 3-game stretch there where you saw, okay, this is kind of why he was a top 5 prospect in all of baseball. But all of that was a really long-winded way of saying all it took was a normal offseason, some physical tweaks for some players, some mental tweaks for other players. This team was awful in 2023. They were embarrassed in 2023. The product was terrible to watch, okay? You don't think that puts fire under everyone's ass in the offseason, makes them want to show up and perform better, live up to expectations? We've seen that all to be true. And I think this is a full-on revenge season for a lot of these guys. So although I am still concerned with Cole being injured, obviously, he's kind of starting to ramp himself back up. I think this success is very sustainable for this team going forward. And I think it should not be underestimated, Taylor. These guys are really, really good.
They are, and the scary thing is they've had this amount of success, and they're not even hitting the ball that hard yet. They've only got a 7% barrel rate right now, which is tied with the A's and the Mets, and it's just exciting to see this team be able to grind down pitchers. It really does remind you of older Yankees teams and certain players that I don't want to make comps to because it might be a little too early.
Right.
But it's really, really nice to see.